Welcome back. You're listening to Emma Barnett on LBC 97.3, standing in for Ian Dale this evening. And just to remind you, in with Nick Ferrari tomorrow on Breakfast is Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, because he is announcing, that is Clegg, that there is an overwhelming dominance of privately educated school children in the UK and that it is creating a corrosive society. And I want to ask you about that gulf in the standards between state and private schools, and whether you believe, like Nick Clegg will be saying tomorrow, and as I say, you can hear that right here with Nick Ferrari on LBC 97.3 on The Breakfast Show, whether you believe that because certain children get to go to private school and certain children get to go to state school, whether it's holding back social mobility and damaging the economy. Now, I'm still going to be taking your calls because there are so many of you, and your text, tweets and emails on whether the proposals which Vince Cable, Business Secretary, has condemned today to allow employers greater ease and the right to sack employees at their will, whether you think that's good or bad for the UK, good or bad for employers and good or bad for employees. So do keep those calls coming in on 0845 6060 973. But I want to move this conversation on to Nick Clegg's sort of list, if you like, of social mobility factors the government are going to monitor tomorrow to see how they can make our society more equal. Now, in real speak, how I've interpreted this and what I think is the important things for us to consider, and I want to hear your views on, is do you think how well you do in life is down to your education? Now, obviously, we're in a situation where private schools and people who've been to private schools are significantly overrepresented in politics, the judiciary, banking, FTSE 100 boardrooms. But obviously, there are other people in those boardrooms, in politics, in the judiciary, probably less so in that particular example, who went to state schools. So do get your calls in and let me know whether you think your school education, because obviously so many people now go to university and there's a whole other part of life once you've left school that is very indicative of how you'll do in the real world and getting a job. But how much of people's success is down to their school education? Nick Clegg tomorrow is going to stand up and say it's corrosive, the way that there's this gulf between those who are state educated and those who are privately educated. And I want to get to the facts here. Like, is your ambition, does it come from school? Does your drive come from your school days? Or does it come from the home? Does it come from your parents? Or is it something you're born with? For me, it was a mixture of all three, I have to say. And I'll tell you more about my experience after I've spoken to my guest. But do let me know where you think your own or your children's drive to succeed comes from. 0845 6060 973. Joining me is Lorrae Yarderberg, who's an education consultant for Yarderberg Crace. Hello, Lorrae.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. So what do you make of, we don't know exactly what he's going to say tomorrow, but Nick Clegg's assertions that our society is corrosive and there's this huge gap between state-educated children and privately educated children in what they go on to do, and social mobility isn't quite right because of all of this?
Well, I think it's an important time to consider this issue because there's so much going on at the moment in this country, and I think education has always got to be at the heart of the future. And looking at children's potential and what's going to happen to them is key to the success of this country. So I think this is a very good time to be looking at it. In terms of what you said before about ambition, I also think this is very, very important. And the question is, where does this come from and what propels children to become successful students and go on to university? And there's a very broad range of answers to that.
Because I think what is interesting is this assertion that if you go to a private school, you're naturally going to go on to university and you're naturally going to end up in a FTSE 100 boardroom. I mean, that isn't the case. My personal experience is I went to a comprehensive and then I went to a private school. Personally, the thing that I got out of the private school, apart from a lot of pressure to do very, very well, was the ambition and the drive and the belief. But I also got that from home. And I don't necessarily believe I wouldn't have had it if I hadn't gone to that school. So what do you think are the factors, or the most important factors, that the government should be focusing on improving if they want to improve social mobility through education?
Well, I think you've hit on the key factors, actually. I think it is all about what drives students to become successful. And there are several key factors. Obviously, there's going to be the home, there's going to be the standard of education that's happening in schools, and then there's going to be what's going on in the environment. And I think that for what's going on at home is very, very important. Schools can provide a lot of support and very good education, but often the drive does come from home. And we see this a lot with families that come into England from other countries, where they come in with very little English and they work extremely hard, and they have a culture, a family culture, to drive themselves forward and achieve the best they can to achieve their potential. And I think we need to look at that very, very carefully. So Nick Clegg needs to look at why people succeed and why children succeed, why students succeed. That really is the key. So start working from that and backwards, and I think a lot of the answers come to the fore.
I mean, interestingly, Lorrae, I think he's going to look at it the other way on. He's going to look where they're not succeeding and why they're not succeeding, as opposed to the way you're suggesting. But we are living in a country at the moment where we've got proposals for parenting lessons. There's pilots going on in Birkenhead at the moment. How can the government, and maybe it is through these parenting lessons, but how can the government get involved in the home and create a culture of aspiration or ambition, as you're talking about?
I think it is very difficult, and I was pleased to see that there are some ideas about bringing parenting in, because those of us who work in education really understand the difficulty at the moment of trying to inspire children when perhaps parents at home are finding things very, very difficult, both financially and also to have the understanding of what they need to do. So I think it's a good thing that he is bringing in this idea of supporting parents. But I think also schools also need to be trying to do more as well to try and inspire children and bring about their aspirations and recognise their achievements, because often children's potential's not necessarily being recognised, and then they're not being encouraged enough realistically as to what they might aspire to, and that is really key.
I mean, Nick Clegg, he himself went to a fee-paying school, and he's in politics, and I think it's slightly unfair that there's always this throw mud at the private school, the kids who go there and say there's a corrosive gulf and all this sort of toxic language that's used to describe it. We live in a free market. People are always going to pay for something if they can and they want to do it. I mean, I don't know how many parents listening tonight, and hopefully I'll find out, would pay for a private school if they could. Lots of people won't want to do it on principle. Lots of people would love to do it. But I think for me, what I don't understand is exactly how Nick Clegg intends to shift society to sort of address that gulf.
No, I agree with you. And I think it is a very, very complex issue. It's not simplistic. Providing funding for students to go to university is just one small part of this. It starts much, much earlier on, in early years, in primary school, with the right sort of values, the right expectations being put into place by all the key people taking part in a child's life. And I think those are the factors that really improve children's chances in life. There are good state schools, there are excellent state schools, as there are independent schools with a whole range of abilities in there. Just because you pay for an education doesn't mean it's going to be better than somebody else's education from state schools.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much for that. That was Lorrae Yarderberg, educational consultant for Yarderberg Crate. Very, very good points there. Now, what is it that you attribute to your success, or what will you attribute to your children's success? Nick Clegg tomorrow is going to stand up and say how corrosive our society has become because of the overwhelming dominance of privately educated school children in Britain. It's bad for our economy, it's bad for our society, it's bad for social mobility. But is it down to your school, how well you do, or is it down to who you are, just in yourself, or is it down to your parents? Give me a call on 0845 6060 973. I'm Emma Barnett on LBC 97.3. The time is 8:30.